I've been waiting for a product like this to pop up for a long time. This is because games are honestly taking a long time to be ported to the Switch at all. There are so many games that I've been wanting to take with me, but haven't been able to, or just hasn't been all that desirable because the portable devices that I have either are underperforming or massive, being too big to carry around. So when I heard of the AYANEO Air, I simply had to give it a try, and here it finally is. So is this device everything that I'd hoped for? Well, for the most part, it is. And today I'll be doing an extensive review on the AYANEO Air Pro model because I think that it is much better than you've heard. So let's dive right in. The exterior design consists of plastic for the entirety of the build. This device, to me, felt pretty cheap when I first held it because of the finish of the shell. It feels too smooth, like hard plastic, and it's not the best material or finish for a handheld since it's a bit uncomfortable to hold for long periods of time. But eventually, I got used to the exterior design, and now I do like it, but something with a softer touch would have been nicer here. This device is really small, being way smaller than the Steam Deck, as you'll be able to see, which is exactly what I was looking for in terms of the form factor. It's basically the same height and length, though just slightly longer than a Nintendo Switch Lite, and the Pro model is particularly thick, like it is a very chunky device for sure, and it does feature some handles or grips around the back that honestly are good enough for me. I have small hands, so I appreciate the less pronounced grips to keep the footprint and the form factor as small as possible. On the front, you're going to find all of your important face buttons and some navigation buttons. These buttons feel really good overall, with the face buttons featuring a good amount of travel and feedback when pressed. The D-pad is really good too, and while it's not at all clicky, it offers a great experience for my testing for gamepad-centric games. It's a really good D-pad. The thumbsticks feature a Hall sensor that pretty much negates drifting altogether, but most importantly to me, the thumb caps are really good with enough grip to them. I really like these thumbsticks because they have a decent amount of resistance, not too much, but just enough, and they just feel really good to use. It's not at all like using the Switch, it's much better than that in my opinion, and they even feature this LED ring around them for some great aesthetics. These are fully customizable too. On the top, you're going to find your shoulder buttons with analog triggers that feel really good to press. Some additional function buttons next to those too, and these are remappable as well. You also get an air vent, a USB-C port, a volume rocker, and a power button with a fingerprint sensor. This is the only part of this device that feels poorly designed because the edges are pretty sharp and your finger could get caught in the corners, which is uncomfortable. But the scanner does work pretty well. On the bottom, you will find stereo speakers, a micro SD card slot, and a headphone jack, and another USB-C port. On the back, you're going to find another giant air vent. Overall, I do really like the design of this device, but I would change a few things to really make this as an even better looking and feeling device. It could use some refining, so let's see what happens with the version 2 in the future. This device features a 5.5-inch 1920 by 1080 OLED display that looks absolutely beautiful in every single way. This display gets pretty bright and is very colorful. The blacks are super rich and deep while the whites are very bright. They nailed it with this display choice because it truly makes a difference in everyday operations and in gaming. This is another aspect that really adds to the overall usability because it means that you get to play your PC games on an OLED screen on the go. Can't get much better than that, to be honest with you. I don't have too much to say about it because I think that my initial description of it should get the main idea across. It's a really, really good screen that runs at a high resolution, which is impressive. You will see much more of it in the gaming test coming up later on in the video. Now, the speakers are pretty disappointing. They are bottom firing, but the problem is just how they sound. They don't get very loud and they always sound pretty hollow to me. These just sound like low quality speakers and like they're being muffled in some way, and I do not like them very much, but they function, I guess. I'm not too hung up over the speakers, but it's worth noting in case you would be, so have a listen. So my particular model features a Ryzen 5560U CPU, which is a 6-core 12-thread CPU, Vega 8 graphics, 16GB of RAM, 512GB of SSD storage, and a 38 watt-hour battery. These specs are pretty good, and I haven't had many issues regarding performance on this device, but what really matters is how this device will perform in real time. Now, this isn't the top-of-the-line model. In fact, this is just the $700 model, and it can get as expensive as $1,249, which is far too much for a device like this. I mean, $700 is already challenging that threshold, very much so, especially compared to the Steam Deck, considering the pricing of that device. But before we get into the gaming test, let's talk about the OS and ISpace. So this device came with Windows 11, and it looks beautiful on this device and display. I'm really glad that it came with Windows and not Linux, as it's just much more manageable in my opinion, but Windows isn't too pleasant to use on a device like this regardless, so I prefer to just set up Steam to open up with the Steam Deck interface upon booting it up, which means that I get to pretty much play with the Steam interface while still running Windows. Now, there's another interface available if you just want to treat this device as a gaming console, which is ISpace, which offers this neat yet laggy and sometimes pretty buggy interface that lets you make important changes such as TDP changes on the fly, which is especially useful, but you also get to do your buttons remapping, LED color changing settings, and then a few more things to help with the experience. There's even a shortcut to lead you straight into it, which is good to have. Now, I don't love ISpace, so I just set the LED colors and shortcuts that I want while rarely even touching the TDP. I just mostly deal with Steam and keep it at that. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about gaming performance, and this is going to be a pretty extensive test. I will be splitting this into 5 different categories with no emulation tests, because when it comes to Windows handhelds, I just care about playing PC games on it, to be honest. So let's begin with the first category being 2D titles and indie titles. These games should all run really well without any issues to speak of on a device like this. Also, I wanted to mention that because I wanted the best balance possible between battery life and performance, I kept the TDP at around 12 watts at all times for all games to make sure that I wasn't killing the battery too quickly, but to also get the best performance with that compromise in mind. Let's begin with a simple game like Danganrampa V3. The game runs beautifully on this device as expected. This game is not at all demanding, and it is mostly one that relies on its style to appeal to people. So the 2D art and everything else is going to run pretty well on a device this powerful, naturally. But I wanted to showcase how a device like this can handle games like this very easily and without any issues to speak of. So if you're a Danganronpa fan, then there are cheaper ways of playing these games on the go. But if you already wanted the AYANEO Air or the AYANEO Air Pro, I should say, then these games will run really well without a doubt. Next is Hollow Knight, which is a 2D platformer that also runs incredibly well. Now, there is considerably more action taking place in a game like this versus Danganronpa, but you can definitely trust the Air Pro to crush a game like this without any issues. I can play this game at 1080p and enjoy the beauty of this OLED display, where this game just looks even more sinister because of those richer blacks. It's very smooth and an easy-going game for this system, so there are no issues here either. Now, Octopath Traveler was somewhat of a different story. I still ran this game at 1080p with the highest settings, and these are the results that I got overall. So in the overworld, the game seems to run at 30 FPS from what I saw, so running around and exploring is not going to be as smooth and will be closer to what the Nintendo Switch can accomplish. But if you lower it to 720p, then 60 FPS is no issue at all in the overworld. However, in battle, even at 1080p, this game runs at 60 FPS and looks beautiful on this device. I really enjoy playing Octopath Traveler on this handheld, and it's probably my preferred platform for this game, considering the overall performance and the fact that I still get an OLED screen with it. And I know that I keep raving about this OLED screen, but it's kind of important to me. It's just a really nice display. Now we're moving on to the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era of gaming, though these are going to be remastered versions of these games that ultimately came out on more recent platforms. However, these are the games that I'm going to be covering in this section, and I genuinely enjoyed going through testing these games, so I really wanted to talk about them. Starting off with Kingdom Hearts 2, from the Epic Games launcher. I ran this game at 1080p and the game looks beautiful. It also runs at a super steady 60 FPS on this device or system. Now this is what I expected because the Win 600 can also run this game at 1080p, but it is still good to see how smooth the experience will be. There are ways of playing this game offline, so it's nice to actually be able to take these games on the go since there are only cloud versions of the Kingdom Hearts games on the Switch, which is a huge shame. So it's great to see that Kingdom Hearts 2, probably the best Kingdom Hearts game, runs this well on the go and just looks as good as it does on such a tiny screen. Final Fantasy X was another story, though, and this one surprised me quite a lot. This game actually struggles to run at a steady frame rate at 1080p, high settings, so I would lower it to 720p and should be able to get a pretty steady frame rate. I mean, this is a turn-based game. I never imagined that it would be this taxing for this device to run. Maybe there was an error in launching or something, but the performance was a bit disappointing. However, this doesn't mean that it isn't playable, because it is if you're willing to mess around with the settings just a little bit. But it is disappointing nonetheless that a remastered PlayStation 2 game is struggling so much to run at a native resolution on modern hardware like this. Just a thought, and something that's worth noting, but with some tweaking, this game will be very easy to run, I'm sure. I'm pretty confident about that actually. Finally is Persona 4 Golden, and this is yet another turn-based game from the PlayStation 2 era that got remastered for the Vita, and then again for PC. This game runs at a perfect 60 FPS, which is, well, perfect. I wouldn't ask for anything more than this. This game runs really well regardless of the circumstances. Whether you're in the overworld or in battle, Persona 4 will run incredibly well. This makes getting a device like this ultimately worth it for a game like this because you're getting an experience here that would be pretty tough to get anywhere else, so that's worth noting. Next is the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era of games, and only one of these games has been remastered for more current systems, so this test will be more demanding on this system, but the Air Pro does a surprisingly good job at crushing this test with very solid performance across the board. Final Fantasy XIII runs really well and works fully offline as well. This game looks really good at 720p, so you do have to adjust the settings, but you should be able to play at relatively high settings, at least even if the resolution is halved. The game runs really well, with no graphical issues to speak of, as I've experienced some bugs from other systems. You won't see those here. It seems that the 5560U can handle this game pretty well, and if you were wondering about the rest of the trilogy, then those games also run really well and are fully playable on this device. This game is one reason why I wanted a handheld like this, so I am really happy that things are working out this way. Definitely a great travel companion if you are a JRPG junkie, I suppose, like me. Dishonored is a game that I haven't touched in a long time, but it's a game that was an absolute pleasure to come back to. This game runs really, really well at close to 60 FPS at 1080p. Honestly, most games from this generation will still run really well like this, but some will require that you drop the resolution in order to get a more playable or enjoyable experience overall. This is with anti-aliasing and even with high settings preset applied with Dishonored in particular. I was still really surprised to see how well it ran, and a lot of games from this generation are like this. Frankly, I expected some issues with the performance, but there have been pretty close to non-existent for the most part. This is really good to see, considering how many great games for this generation there are, and that you can take them on the go. Lastly, we got Dark Souls Remastered. This game runs at a surprising 60 FPS at 720p. The game looks amazing, and it feels so smooth at this frame rate. It feels like the perfect system for a game like this. I know that on the Switch, the game runs at 30 FPS for the most part, but here it runs at a full 60 FPS. It's genuinely fantastic. Thanks to the Hall sensing sticks, you will get a very precise experience here, which I would consider to be perfect for a game like this, especially if you wanted to be able to take this game with you on the go. So I would expect that most people will really enjoy playing Dark Souls Remastered on the system as much as I did. Next up is the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One generation of games, which I will be testing 3 games from. Surprisingly, I got really good performance here too, though it isn't perfect. It will strongly depend on the game, but the games that I tested were more than playable on this system. Let's start with Nier Automata, which runs nicely at 720p high settings. This game looks very nice, but it doesn't run at 60 FPS, maybe hovering in the 40s from what I can tell, but it is still really smooth for the most part, and it's certainly a better experience than playing it on the Switch. I really enjoyed it, and I found that this game ran surprisingly well, even if it wasn't running at 60 FPS, and I doubt that turning the settings down to low would be worth the extra frame rate. A game like this should be admired for its visuals as well. But so far, gameplay is pretty smooth and the performance is something to write home about, at least I think so, even if it's nothing too exceptional per se. Next is Dark Souls 3, which does run at 30 FPS at 720p with the settings set to medium. This isn't necessarily ideal for a system like this, but it's fine for a portable experience. This is still a totally playable game, and I wasn't bothered playing it this way at all, because if you're used to playing this game on consoles anyway, then it will feel pretty much the same here. But if you were expecting something closer to the 60 FPS PC experience, then this is where you would be understandably disappointed. But I personally did not mind the performance here, and think that it is fine for a portable experience overall. Either way, I really enjoy playing Dark Souls 3 on the system, and I'm perfectly fine making these compromises. Lastly, it's going to be Soul Hackers 2. This game came out pretty recently, but I put it in this category because it did release on PlayStation 4. I mean, if you look at the game, then you can tell that the game was clearly made to run well on a PlayStation 4 primarily based on the graphics and art style. And the game runs really well at 1080p with high settings. In fact, it looks downright amazing on this system in particular, which makes me even more puzzled as to why we couldn't see this game ported to the Switch. For me, this game was the biggest reason why I wanted to get this handheld. A game like this just seems better suited for portable handheld experience. And I was right. The gameplay is really cool and I personally really enjoy it. So this generation of games is still fully playable on the system with varying degrees of enjoyment for the most part. Now for the final category, which is the most demanding category. I couldn't test out too many games here, so I mostly stuck to the ones that I cared about the most. I just wanted to see how well they would run on the system since I still want to be able to play these games portably, but these are some problematic games to run for the most part. Anyway, here are going to be my thoughts and my results, as well as my overall list of games. With the Final Fantasy VII Remake, you have to set everything to 720p, turn all enhancements off, and keep the settings as low as possible in order to get playable performance. But it does still look alright on a device like this because of the screen size, and it does still run at about 30 FPS while dropping a little bit every now and then, mostly during combat, so that's worth considering. And while many would consider this to be a suboptimal experience, I think that it's fine. I'm willing to deal with the less than favorable settings since the game still looks pretty okay and runs pretty okay. This is good enough for me, but it might not be the case for a lot of other people. Hopefully, the footage on screen helps make my argument some justice at least. Next is Final Fantasy XV. I know that I keep talking about JRPGs, but these are just the games that I enjoy the most, so please bear with me. This game also required me to drop all settings to the lowest with VSync off with resolution set to 75% and at 720p. And surprisingly, while still having to load a massive open world, I can still sustain 30 FPS most of the time. This is okay for me to be able to play the game, but maybe it's just too big of a compromise since the Steam Deck does offer much better performance with what is one of my favorite games of all time. So maybe the AYANEO 2 will provide the performance that I'm looking for. Guess we will have to see. But it is playable, however. It's not worth getting this console to play this game because you are making far too many concessions and compromises to make this playable at the end of the day, even for me. Next is Elden Ring, which did run a bit better than I expected. It's totally playable, running at an average of 30 FPS at 720p, with everything dropped down to the lowest settings and every enhancement being turned off. You're making a lot of compromises, but I would consider this to be fine for the most part. I played through a few sequences and had a fine experience. I liked how the game looked still, even if a bit pixelated, even on a screen that's this small, but I would consider this to be acceptable for a handheld experience for the most part. But I understand if most people wouldn't really feel that way because, yeah, there are a lot of compromises being made here for Elden Ring. And finally, Kingdom Hearts 3. This game actually ran quite well, definitely ran considerably better than I was expecting it to, because even though you do have to run this game at low settings at 720p, you do still get a very steady 30 FPS in the gameplay, whether you're in battle, exploring in the overworld, and that kind of thing. It doesn't really matter, because this game will run quite well, and it can even be in the most demanding of sections too. So I was actually very pleasantly surprised with the performance coming from Kingdom Hearts 3 here, and I would absolutely consider this game to be more than playable on a system like this. It's been kind of a dream of mine to be able to take this game with me on the go, and since the idea of it coming to the Switch offline kind of died out for me, I had to use mods in order to make that offline experience work for me on this system, but even then, it at least does work offline. But with that said, yes, performance is going to be pretty good still when it comes to Kingdom Hearts 3, but there are still going to be those compromises, so keep that in mind. With all of the games that I mentioned in this category, that's going to be the case. As for the battery life, we are going to get about 2.5 hours of playtime, depending on the game, but with the TDP set properly, that shouldn't be much of a problem. It's acceptable, in my opinion, and for a portable experience, I think that it is fine, especially considering the kinds of games that I will be playing. You would never catch me playing for 3 hours at a time regardless, because I just don't have that kind of time anyway. So in conclusion, I didn't think that the AYANEO Air Pro would be this good of a performer. If you want this form factor with similar power to a Steam Deck, then you have to look at this device. But notice that I said similar. The Steam Deck is still more powerful than the AYANEO Air Pro, even at the highest configuration with the highest settings, and even if you decide that paying 3 times the amount that the base Steam Deck is worth it, then yeah, I mean, I can't really say too much there, because the AYANEO Air Pro already is kind of really pushing it when it comes to its value. I mean, when you do compare it to the Steam Deck, that is. But where the value comes from me is just the size and the power that you get with that size nonetheless. The Steam Deck is great. It's fantastic, but I don't want to take this with me on the go. It's more so something that I would prefer to use on a couch or in bed at home while I'm already stationary. But if I'm traveling and I don't want to stand out all that much, just want something small, but something that can still run my games. If it can't run on my Switch, or if it's not available on my Switch, then I want it to be available on my AYANEO Air Pro. This device has given me a lot of that, and I very much appreciate it. Can't wait for version 2 to hopefully address some of the battery life issues that some people might be having. For me, more so the performance and maybe some aesthetic concessions and that kind of thing. But I think that the AYANEO Air Pro is worth it, at least the model and configuration that I went with. I wouldn't recommend going necessarily any higher than that, and I think that this is a good one to go with. So if you wanted the AYANEO Air Pro, you have my blessing, son. Go for it. Strongly recommended. Now, with that said, thank you so much for watching this video all the way up until the very end. I do very much appreciate it. This one was a very long video, probably the longest one that I have made in a while. So I do appreciate you sticking around until the very end. No affiliate links for this product unless you want to buy it from Amazon, but it's going to cost you more if you want to buy it from Amazon. But it will get to you way sooner. So affiliate links to Amazon in case you're willing to make that compromise. If you are to use my link, then I would appreciate that a lot, because it does go some way to helping out the channel and allowing me to buy more review units like this so that I can talk about them on this channel. So thank you for that. Also, please make sure to follow me on Instagram, where I do post every now and then, and you can also find me on my blogging channel, where I've been posting some Yu-Gi-Oh deck profiles if that is something that interests you at all. Now, with that said, this has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more videos that are going to be coming up very, very soon. And it is going to be an exciting end of the year. So until then, have a good one.